So Fred, can you just tell us a little bit about the neighborhood that the Jackson House is in? And I think we're going to take a little bit of a time out before we ask you that question, Fred. Maybe we have a little bit of technical difficulty. Oh, we're not on Facebook. Enjoy a glass of water while we wait. Are we going to do this all over again? Or are we going to... No. Technology is a wonderful thing. Keeping us in touch with you guys during COVID. We are open here at the History Center, but we're doing a lot of these programs virtually because we just can't have groups meeting as we normally would in Tico Hall and our other classrooms. But hopefully as things get back to normal, we'll be able to do these things in person. Although we probably will always have a virtual component because we have found that this is a good way for us to really spread our programs to an audience that can't reach us either because of access problems or proximity problems. So this is a great way for us to reach out to a broader audience. And that broader audience is reaching out to us back again, maybe? We're working on it. Hold tight. If you're watching this on a delay, you can fast forward past all this. But right now, if you're watching this live, then you're getting to see how live television, live video works. We're still waiting. We will be, for those watching live, we will be asking for questions. And so if you're on Facebook, you can type in the question. If you are on doing this by the Zoom link, you can chat, you can type your questions into the chat. And so we will be fielding questions as we go along and do this. Somebody's testing the Q&A feature and it works. Great. Y'all can probably hear the chatter in the background. Sounds work sometimes. It's okay. Oh, what time do you expect to start? That's a good question. We started a few minutes ago, but we're now waiting for Facebook to catch up to us. And somebody, oh, Dr. Fox says it works. Karen just asked about my beard. Yes, but my COVID beard. It's about 11 months old, and so either I'll shave it off when COVID is over or when the lightning sails up again. Boy, those questions just abounding. Obviously, people are watching this, which is wonderful, and so I think we're just trying to get the Facebook side of things going. And yes, Ariana Santiago asked if we'll be able to ask the individual panelist questions, and you absolutely will be able to. I'll be kind of administering the questions, but if you have a question for a particular panelist, we definitely will make sure it's directed in the right direction. No chat feature enabled with Zoom, correct? I believe that's the case. Oh, so Curtis Stokes, board member of ours, says Facebook works, guys. So just came on. Oh, and Doris having a hard time hearing me. Is anybody else having a hard time? Since we're thank you. Since there's anybody else anyone's hearing this, can everybody hear me okay? Somebody said they're having a hard time hearing me. I'm the least important of these panelists, so that's okay. As long as everybody else can be heard, that's the most important thing. So I'm glad, Doris, you got on, because I know you had a little bit of a hard time finding the link, so I'm glad to see you there. Great, hearing me fine. Thank you all so much for tuning in. There's lots of folks watching this, which is fantastic. And I appreciate y'all putting up with our technical difficulties. I look again over at my colleagues to see if we're working. I glance back at my chat to see if this is working. Hearing me just fine. Great, thank you. How are we doing over here? We look good? I see some nodding in the affirmative. Looking for the big man. There we go. Okay. Apparently we're here. Hi. Thank you. So back to what I was going to say. Fred, the first question is going to go to you. Can you just give us a little bit of a kind of the context? If you go to the Jackson House today, which is on Zack Street near Union Station, right now there's just a lot of surface parking around there. There's one structure right on Nebraska and Zack that's now an enterprise rental car company. but surrounding the Jackson House is just a sea of asphalt. Obviously, that wasn't always the case. So, Fred, can you give us a little bit of the kind of overall context of the neighborhood and also your relationship with the family, because you were Tampa native and you certainly knew these folks for a long time. So, just give us a little bit of kind of both personal history and general history of the neighborhood.
Well, thank you, Rodney, for the welcome, and good evening to everyone who's listening and watching this evening. The Jackson House, as you mentioned, 851 Zack Street, for most of the 1900s, set in the middle of what was a neighborhood occupied by predominantly African Americans. I actually saw a photograph that Willie Robinson had that showed some of the other houses on both the north and the southern part of the street of Zack Street. And this was before the Tampa Fire Department bought much of that property. And then also the George Edgecombe Courthouse occupies quite a bit. So right now, the Jackson House sort of sits isolated, but it was in the middle of a neighborhood. And of course, the boarding house that most people are familiar with or have heard about, that started as a result of Moses Jackson having the mind of a businessman and realizing that because the Jackson House sat just one block west of the Tampa Union Station, and you had all these passengers coming in, many of them were African Americans, if they didn't have family or good friends in the city, they would need somewhere to stay. So, he eventually began adding rooms and adding rooms. And we know about the musical legacy of all of the famous people who came there. Perhaps one of the most famous, who we could say perhaps the greatest jazz singer ever, Ella Fitzgerald, who we know stayed there. But this was about music, and it was also about business. The Robinsons and the Jacksons were business people. And so while Willie Robinson, who was a friend of mine, we actually went to junior high school and high school together and we're fraternity brothers. We spent a lot of time together as young adults and even as older adults. Because the Jackson House was so important to the history, the overall history of this city, not just to African Americans, but to the general history of this city, I'm so happy that we're going to preserve those memories. Now, Tampa was a place that was, as you can imagine, in the South, being a segregated city where you had a large number of African Americans, actually the largest number of African Americans living in Tampa for many years during the 1900s, lived in that central core area, which previously had been called the Scrub and Central Avenue because of the Black businesses. Then in the 1950s, public housing with Central Park Village. That was really the place to be, where you went to take care of all of your need for business. It's where you went to go shopping. It's where you went to go to the movies or the other establishments where you had a great time. That was a 10-minute walk away from the Jackson House. So they were right there in the middle of all of these wonderful things going on. Willie Robinson, who I take my hat off to, because he saw the need to preserve the memory of his house. And Sarah Jackson Robinson, who I got to know also, Willie's mother, before she passed, was born in the Jackson House, lived in the Jackson House her entire life. She died at the age of 87 in the Jackson House. She was the Jackson House. And now we have this wonderful opportunity to preserve all that location meant to African Americans and to Tampa as a whole.
Thank you, Fred. That's outstanding. And it's something that we're really looking forward to as far as the preserving of the house and the what we can look forward to the future. So Dr. Massey, some of the plans for the house could include a history museum. And there are, as Fred just talked about, a lot of different topics, a lot of different themes that could be covered in a renovated Jackson House that could be a museum. What are some of the things that we could cover from a thematic standpoint, and what are some of the things that the History Center has done to render assistance to both the Jackson House Foundation and the Vinnick Family Foundation to push this endeavor forward.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Rodney. It's really great to be with the panel today. And I think I can speak for literally everyone at the Tampa Bay History Center when I say this is a really exciting project. I mean, we've been talking about this now for the last couple of years, and the History Center is dedicated to really helping out with this project, you know, helping to think about what's the best way to, as Fred rightly said, to, you know, tell the history of this very important family and this very important neighborhood. And so we're dedicated to doing that. And so what I'm going to do with my brief 10 minutes today is I just wanted to show y'all a few images and talk a little bit about some ideas that we've had here at the History Center when it comes to the house, and hopefully turning the house into this place that really celebrates Black history and culture here in the Bay Area. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all real quick here. All right. And so with the Jackson House project, just to tell you my little part in this is I've been very lucky in that from the get-go, well, I guess roughly about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I was asked, well, what do you think about the Jackson House? And I said what a lot of us here at the Tampa Bay History Center have said. I said, it's great. It's such an important structure because it's one of the few remaining buildings in that Zac corridor that Fred was talking about that really is a testament to a different past, right? A testament to a moment in our community's Black history, and we should really work to preserve it. And they said, well, that's great. You think that, Brad. Why don't you start thinking about what would be a good way to do that? So with that, I got to do something. I was very fortunate to be able to visit the house itself. And when I think about the past, I've been a historian for about 15 years now. Our interpretation of the past always starts with the present. So I was lucky in that I had the opportunity to enter the house, to actually enter the space and really just think about what the space is and how it can be used to tell this very important history of our community. So with that said, I want to show you a couple pictures. This was me in the house in October of 2020. That's my colleague Rodney right there to the right. And one thing we did when we were at the house to start thinking about what stories we wanted to tell is we save things and we look through, and we found a lot of interesting things in the house because, as Fred said, this house was a business, right? As well as a dwelling for a family. And so we found different things. Some of the things we're not even sure where they came from. You can see me holding a small shoe here. And then we also stored a lot of stuff that we found in the house. So when I looked at these things with my colleagues at the Tampa Bay History Center, I thought, well, you know, what are the stories that we want to tell? What do we want to save for posterity? And one of the things we were thinking is the important thing about the Jackson House is it tells the story of this family, but it can also be a space where we talk about the long history of the African-American experience here in Tampa. And that stretches really far back. You know, I think when a lot of people think about Black history in the United States, we think a lot about the mid-20th century. And there's definitely good reasons for that. It's incredibly important. As Fred alluded to, you have these booming businesses. You also have Jim Crow, right? You have this moment of segregation, and you have the civil rights movement. And one thing we thought here at the Tampa Bay History Center is those are stories we definitely want to tell in the Jackson House, but other stories that might be great to tell is the long history of the Black experience in the Tampa Bay area, because it is so interesting and it's so diverse. So when you think about it, it stretches all the way back to the 1500s when Spanish explorers come here, Narvaez in particular to the Bay Area. There's people of African descent on that trip, and particularly a man by the name of Esteban, who basically accompanies these early explorers. And there's others as well. And then when we fast forward into the 16 and 1700s, there's another experience. When Florida is going to be controlled by the Spanish, one thing that's going to happen is you see a migration, especially of a lot of enslaved people that want to escape slavery, especially the British versions and the colonial versions. They start to come down into Florida. And a lot of them make their homes here in the Tampa Bay area. One of them is this man right here who becomes affiliated with the Seminole tribe of John Cavallo. And he's really interesting because he pops up in the historical record. And he's very unique in, our history. And he tells a story that you don't see other places of, somebody of sub-Saharan African descent who comes down to Florida, becomes affiliated with the Seminole tribe. So when we think about people like John, these are incredibly important stories that we can tell here in Tampa in ways that they probably can't really be told anywhere else. With that in mind, one thing we want to do, and we were talking about this just the other day, Fred was here at the History Center and we were meeting. We're obviously, here at the History Center, we're a museum. And what we want to do is we want to take objects from the past to tell the story. So we thought about to ourselves, well, what are some of the things that we have that can tell these stories? And one thing we have here at the History Center is an extensive map collection. And these maps tell all different types of stories. And some of those stories are stories from the 1800s and the Seminole Wars. And when you think about Seminole War history, it's very unique here to Tampa, right? We have Fort Brooke. Zachary Taylor, who later becomes president, is going to be in Tampa during the war. But I think sometimes what members of the community sometimes forget is the Seminole War was also a war to remove or re-enslave people that had escaped, African-American people that had escaped slavery in the Deep South, particularly the Plantation South. So just some of the things we were thinking to help to tell that story is this is a map from 1838. And if you zoom in right here, this is in the left, kind of the left middle, almost corner of the map, you see a designated right here, quote, Old Negro Town, end quote. And things like this are really interesting because items like this map allow us to tell these stories, right? That these communities are out there and they're these Black communities that have been forgotten when we think about the historical record, but they are incredibly important in our history here in Tampa. And especially down by the Manatee, if you head a little south of the bay, down in present day Manatee County, there's a very large, important Maroon community down there. So when we think about the Jackson House, we think, well, this is could be an opportunity where we could tell some of these stories as well. And then, of course, we have other maps. And then as politics start to change down here in Florida, the Black experience starts to change. And what happens is the Seminole Wars are going to be fought. They're going to be wars of removal, right? This attempt to remove Seminoles, this attempt to remove Black Seminoles, enslave certain people. And what happens then is those wars are largely going to be successful in the United States and in Florida. And what you see then is there's an extension of the plantation economy here in the Tampa Bay area. And that's a really important story that needs to be told. Various documents tell us, for example, that in 1839, we have one of the first records of an enslaved person being purchased in Tampa for $625. And you have people like Dorcas Bryant, who live here in the Tampa area in the 1800s, and they're going to be and she's an enslaved woman, and she's really interesting. Her and this woman named Sarah Brown and some of these others, when the war happens, the Civil War, they're going to do things to agitate for their freedom. And a lot of people in Tampa are going to escape, especially in 1864 as the war turns against the Confederacy. So once again, this is a really important moment in our history. And one thing we're hoping, maybe depending on the shape that this project takes, is we could tell the story of Dorcas, we can tell the story of these other people that live in the antebellum South, in the Plantation South, because it's such an important part of our history. And just to give you an idea of how important enslavement is, in Tampa in 1850, there's about 179 enslaved people that live in the area, and their literal worth and that what they can be sold for in the market is worth more than the land and the buildings in the county. So their stories, of struggling under enslavement and then fighting to make new communities here in Tampa are incredibly important. And they're stories that, we definitely want to tell. And then after the war, things change. People like Sarah, people like Dorcas, they build new communities, and they build them under very difficult circumstances, under Reconstruction, and then later the solidification of Jim Crow. And so what we see is we start to see this very robust African-American community that gets built. And Fred was talking about some of these things, but I'll just give you a couple statistics. So in 1895, according to a Sanborn map, which is an old type of document that we like to use here at the History Center, there's 17 Black-owned businesses that run up and down Central Avenue. So we start to see this beginning of this community that, that Fred was talking about, and it's incredibly important. And census records can tell us even more. Like in 1910, it tells us there's 2 Black attorneys and there's 9 physicians that are operating in this neighborhood. So we can use these things to see the community take shape and change over time. And then one part of our history that's really interesting is the Buffalo Soldiers. And this is a story a lot of Tampans know. Of course, Tampa's going to be a disembarkment point for the war in Cuba and the Spanish-Cuban-American War, but it also becomes a battleground against Jim Crow. And it's really interesting that a lot of Black US soldiers are going to come to Tampa, and there'll be an event where a Black child is held up and shot at, and there's going to be resistance, right? There's going to be this movement by the soldiers to say, no, this isn't acceptable anymore. And you're going to see a lot of conflict between these soldiers that come into town and the community and the power structure that runs Tampa. And it's a really important moment in Tampa's history. And this is a photo, by the way, taken here in Tampa of some of these soldiers. And then going back to kind of what Fred was saying, you know, we have the Spanish-American War, and we have the development of these new communities, and we have these very successful Black business people. We have people that create orange groves. We have Fortune Taylor, right, in the Taylor family, and they become large landowners in the city, and they become very influential. And we know this because we have the oral histories of it, but then we also see the documents, right? We can see the land that these people owned. We can see the orange groves that they planted. And I'll do a zoom in. This is a map that we have here in our collection. And I know it's a little fuzzy, but this is an interesting map in 1885, kind of over there on the right-hand side. You can see where it says Central Avenue. Then on the left-hand side, you see Fortune, and there's orange groves above that. So this is a moment in Tampa's history where you start to see people like Cyrus Charles with his orange groves. He's very successful, and some of these other members in the community. Which brings us, and I could drone on and on forever, so I will spare y'all, but this is such an interesting history. But it brings us to the moment that Fred was talking about. And, you know, you have the development of the Scrub, which is this Black neighborhood that takes shape, you know, around Central Avenue. And then you have other people come in as Tampa develops. I have a great picture right here of, this is one of the construction crews for the Tampa Bay Hotel. And a lot of these workers are Black. So you have them coming in, they're getting jobs working the hotels. The railroads are really important for employment for Black citizens. And also the railroads are interesting too, because they actually take advantage of the penal system, and then they impress literally a lot of Black convicts to do work on the railroad. So you have these different things that are going to really make the Black community in Tampa a lot larger. And then that brings us to the Jackson House, as Fred was saying. And then what we see is this really interesting story of this family and the businesses that they run. And they set up this boarding house. They built it in the early 1900s, but that's not the end of the story. They also run a successful laundry service. They're also involved in a taxi cab company. And this is a Sanborn map from 1931. This is a really cool map. And I'm going to zoom in for you right here. You can see right here, we're under the 835. It says boarding house and then colored right there. And so this is the Jackson House right there in the historical record, listed as a boarding house for Black people that are visiting or staying here in Tampa. So it's a really interesting document that helps us tell the story, if you let me skip ahead real quick, of this family. And this is a picture that Fred found for us recently. This is Willie. And then this is Sarah Jackson Robinson. And they're going to be the ones that live in this house for most of the 20th century. They're the family that's going to run this house. And along with the house, as I said, one thing we geek out here about at the Tampa History Center is searching through the record. And I was looking through the 1924 directory, and I saw right here, what you see under the taxi cabs is you see a member of the Jackson family. Jackson Ernest right here. So they're involved in these different businesses in the city. And they're involved in Central Avenue. And Central Avenue is really such an important place in Tampa because you have these, you have these entertainers visiting, and that's a big story that gets told, and that's important. But most of the people staying at the Jackson House are working people. You have Black porters, working for the train companies was really important for a lot of African Americans, and they're going to stay at the house. You have traveling business people that are going to come and they'll stay at the house. So it's a place to tell, all these histories, not just histories of people that are very famous here in Tampa. Or I should say famous people that come and visit Tampa during this time. And then here's a picture of Central Avenue in its heyday. And just to reiterate, as I'm getting ready to make my closing marks here, we're talking about a neighborhood whose structures were almost entirely demolished. I mean, what happens with urban renewal is a lot of these places are literally taken apart and destroyed. And so when you think about the Jackson House today, this is a picture of the interstate system. This is from a few decades ago. It's going to run right through this neighborhood. And that's why the Jackson House is so important, right? It speaks to a particular time and place, and it speaks to structures, unfortunately, many of which we have lost. And so it's one of the reasons we're so excited about the Jackson House project here at the Tampa Bay History Center. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is all in the conceptual phase for us and our partners, the Jackson House Foundation and everybody else that's involved in this, but it's also an opportunity to bring history to the present. And one thing we're doing here at the Tampa Bay History Center is we're always collecting. With our Tampa Bay Stories initiatives, we went out into the community. We went to protest. We collected Black Lives Matter signs. We're going out there and we always think to ourselves, well, what things can we collect that historians 50 years from now are really going to value when they tell the story. So we're out there collecting. And one thing we're hoping maybe we can do is bring history all the way to 2021 with this project. So Rodney, I know I've droned on for a little too long, so I'm gonna stop it right there, but I'll be happy to answer any questions later on. Rodney, you're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Brad. I appreciate that. I was muted. So thanks. That was actually a really great overview. And it reminded me that we actually prepared a couple images to show during Fred's presentation. So I think I want to show those really quick because they actually, they are aerial photographs that show the Jackson House. And unfortunately, there are very few photographs that historic photographs that include the Jackson House. And so it's really important for us to try and gather these things as well as artifacts. And so, and also we definitely want to continue our program with Dr. Collins and with Dr. Shannon Barker. And then if any questions for our panelists, we're going to offer those. But I know we've had a couple questions come along. And so I want to address a couple of things. I want to show a few shots of the Jackson House in its historic context. I want to get to Dr. Collins and talk about the foundation. But one of our viewers, Brandon, has asked a really good question. It's really pertinent to the History Center about the importance of the stories that we're discussing today and whether or not these stories and others will appear here at the History Center within our, within the four walls here on Water Street. And the answer is absolutely yes. Of course, we already talk about African-American histories. We talk about the history of all the communities here at the History Center. But we are actually going to embark very soon on some work in our permanent galleries. We're going to we've kind of examined our spaces here over the past few years. We're now 12 years old here in this building, and so we're going to renovate a portion of our third floor gallery and devote some space to really going in depth to some African American stories, some stories that go back to Esteban and the early folks that were with the Spanish explorers, including some both free Africans and enslaved Africans who were part of those early expeditions, and going up through the present. And so, so we really do want to focus our own attention here in our galleries on telling a fuller story of Black history here, but also hopefully being able to use the Jackson House to tell those stories as well. So I appreciate that question. And then real quick, another question was about the Jackson House being in the Green Book, and the answer is no. The Jackson House was not in the Green Book. You had to pay to be in those things. It's like any advertising today, and so it's probably fairly expensive to do so. And it was the family was just trying to get by and do what they could. There were a couple of hotels on Central Avenue, the Central Hotel being the biggest one, and I believe they were in the Green Book. And a few restaurants as well, but not a lot for in Tampa in the Green Book back when they were around. So really quick, I'm going to share my screen. I do want to be able to talk about some of the images that we have here in the collection. Unfortunately, we don't have very many, but with the ones that we do have, we are very excited about. And so we wanted to share this during Fred's presentation, but did not get a chance to. So I just want to really quick show these to everybody. Sorry about any kind of delay there might be in this process. There we go. So this first image, you can see the Tampa Union Station, which is pretty much in the middle of the frame, and then looking to the southwest with downtown and Hillsborough Bay in the background. And believe it or not, the Jackson House is in this photograph. It's right here, slightly obscured by a 2-story brick building that was across Zack Street from it. There was a kind of a business block that was across the street. Again, there was a lot of structures in that neighborhood, all of which are gone except for the Jackson House. And then that's from the 1940s. The 1950s, a very similar view of downtown. Again, Union Station, you can see all the trains going up to the backside of Union Station. And the Jackson House is in this shot as well, which I will zoom in here. You can see it's actually one of the last additions to the house was made between those two photographs, which is really interesting. And the last picture is actually taken by my father-in-law when he was a young man. He was a photographer who did a lot of work around town kind of on his own. And so this shows taken from Nebraska Avenue looking to the west down Zack, and you can see the Jackson House, the front of the Jackson House here, which is really kind of neat to be able to see the house. There's actually somebody who's maybe either a member of the family or one of the people boarding there on the second floor balcony. So we don't have a whole lot of the house a lot of pictures of the house, but we're looking to gain more photos of the house and the neighborhood. So that's going to be a collection initiative for us here at the History Center. And so you can go to the website. We actually have a page on our website called Tampa Bay Stories, where we are people have an opportunity to share the items that they have or share information about items that they may have. So with that, let's move on with our program. And now we want to turn to Dr. Carolyn Collins, who again is the chair of the Jackson House Foundation. And Dr. Collins, if you could please just talk to us about kind of how the ownership of the house has been of course, in the Jackson and Robinson families for so long, but now it's in the hands of a private foundation. So please tell us a little bit about that and kind of why that came to be.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. I'm sorry. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to participate with the History Center. Let me start off by saying on behalf of our full board, we really appreciate all the collaboration, the teamwork, the partnership, and encourage community involvement. I will talk about our board, but the community to me is a very key component of what we do. And we in the past have had community meetings. We were ready to restart those community meetings. We did them quarterly. So the community can bring things in, talk to us about what we wanted, what they thought that they would like to see. And it was initiated even with Willie there. And so we do want to encourage the community that despite of the pandemic, we're still soliciting pictures, as you just showed, pictures. We're still soliciting materials, music, etc., from that period of time and the involvement with the Jackson House. We have a 13-member board. And before I even talk about the board, I want to talk about one of the members who did not want to be a member of the board, but she's very critical to the board now in the transition of both Willie and his mother and the remaining family. On our board is one of the original members of the Jackson House family, and it's Mrs. Antoinette Jackson. And we wish her well today as we're doing this because she's live in the Texas area. And with what's going on in Texas, we wish Miss Jackson well. But she is on our board and a very active member of the Jackson House Board of Directors. In addition to her, who's not on the board, that's here in Tampa, is Miss Johnny Saunders. And Miss Johnny Saunders, we want to salute her. Mrs. Saunders actually was so happy when she got a chance to meet Christina and others down at the Jackson House when we went in about a month or two ago. But she actually was born in the house, raised in the house, and went away, and now is back home after her professional life and her family life. And she's back home and she's living here in Tampa. And she's a critical piece of the history and the involvement that support us with the board. She says, "You're doing a great job. I don't want to be on the board. Just keep doing what you're doing." But we actually have board members from both Tampa, St. Pete. We invite and encourage others to come and get active. We're very pleased that we have 2 students on the board. We have a high school student and we have a college student. One of our high school students, when she went off to venture on her college degree, she asked us if she could stay on the board, and we said yes. And then one of her high school friends had an interest in engineering and architect, and she contacted us with her parents and say, "Can I take her place on the board?" And I said, "No, but you can come and add." So we do have 2 students who comes from a total different perspective than even those of us that are on the board, and even some of the things that we just heard Brad share with us. They have a different ideology on what the Jackson House should represent. And that's the best thing, because we on one page, they on another page, and we want the community to come in and bring their page. So it's a combined effort from all of us. I don't particularly want to give the board members all their names, but we have a dedicated board. We probably are going to have a couple of openings on the board coming up because some of our members are going into a emeritus status. And so we'll be opening up more seats on the board. We meet once a month. We are meeting now virtually. We actually have worked very closely with the Vinnick Foundation. And had it not been for the Vinnick Foundation, we may not all be sitting here talking about the preservation of the Jackson House. I got involved when Willie was sent to me by Fred from your fraternity. And he came to the NAACP when we did an agreement with the Divine Nine under my presidency. And Willie had been there with me, and he would come in after all the meetings was over. He'd know I was there, looked like 24/7, and he would come in sometime and sit down and we would chat and talk. And he would always tell me about the history. And he said, "I want you to come over." And I went over to the house and we sat out on the porch and we looked through the photo albums and the pictures, etc. And he ultimately builds up the internal fortitude, I call it, to say, "Hey, I want you to do something for me." And I said, "What?" And he had had such a difficult time with so many individuals promising to do things that had not materialized. And he was really concerned. And he says, "I want somebody that's going to take this from where I've tried to hold it because this is what my mother wants and this is what I want. And I want to be able to move it to the next level." And he said, "I've watched you and I think you would be committed to the cause." And I looked at him and said, "Really?" So we presented it to take it on as a 1-month project only after Congresswoman Castor called me. Her staff called and said, "She's asked you to take on and save that Jackson House and do not lose it." And she said, "Would you work with Willie or whoever to say that?" And so during that time, it was a private owned home. We found it very difficult to get funding from governmental entities and sometimes even private entities because of that. And so that was one of the first tackles we did. And that's when the foundation itself, board of directors, assumed the responsibility, and the house became ours through the processes that we used. And then after that, we decided that we would continue to coalesce. And I saw the pictures when you saw all the framing in the house. Everybody go, that house going to fall down. I say, no, it's not going to fall down. Because when we were fortunate enough from the Lightning Foundation with Mrs. Penny Vinnick and their group in the Family Vinnick Foundation, we were fortunate enough that Willie was here to get the award. And when he received the award, we used those funds to actually stabilize the house with a local contractor that worked with us. And he even has some items that came out of the house that was quite astounding, brand new methods that were used in the home by the residents, by Willie's mother and with her sisters. And he was able to get those items and secure them for us as well. So when he did that stabilization, thanks to the Vinnick Foundation, we are able to sit here today and talk about where we go from here. Because over the years, Willie's mother and Willie, despite the fact of success they had with historical designation, still was unfortunate to be able to move forward. And I will go ahead and indicate that Senator Joyner, when she was in the state legislature, came to me and said, if you help him, we've got to get the house in a mode so that we can get money from governmental entities and private entities. We were blessed. We were blessed by the Vinnick Foundation. I always say that they did a blessings for both Willie's mother and Willie when they decided to come in, even after helping us stabilize the house, to put us where we are today. And so I always say, everybody would say to me, well, what did the city do? And what did the mayor do? And what did everyone? I say, no, what did you do? And so the whole focus behind the Jackson House is, how do we bring this together? How do we tell the story? And I have to give the name of Ms. Bonser, one of our founding board members from its inception. I mean, she monitored the house. She stayed down there. She went to the old fire station. She went to the new fire station. She said, protect it, don't let nothing happen. If the lights went out on the streets over the Jackson House, she would call Tico and they knew it was her. And they would say, oh, we got to get these lights back on. But we don't have the kind of board members that might be able to say, I can write a $500,000 check. But we were fortunate enough to have a business, I call them right now, our business blessing that came from Mr. Vinnick and the foundation, who felt it deemed appropriate to do this. And in lieu of the question that another young man just asked, those are the kind of questions that we are asking community people. What would you like to see in the house? You could go to our website with the Jackson House, webmaster, keep that up. Our secretary is excellent. We get letters, emails, inquiries. He has a little block on our website where you could send him information and we respond to it on a daily basis. They come in. I don't respond. I receive them, but our secretary actually respond to them instantly as soon as she gets them. But we have people that are sending us information, telling us what they would like to see, telling us how they would like to be involved, what could they do for research and things of that nature. So we're real happy. Like I say, I have a pretty good treasurer. He try to keep our paperwork squared away. He's from St. Pete, our vice chair. We maintain Willie. I had a number of people question, and I want to say this while we're doing this. Why is Willie still on your website? Because this is all about Willie. And we wanted to salute him for 1 year. And we kept him on the website, and now he's still there in a memory capacity. But we have a board that work collaboratively. They will tell you what they like. They will tell you what they think we should do. And they will agree with you and disagree with you just as they do with me. And I do not want a board that's going to sit back and be complacent. So I appreciate our board. We meet on a monthly basis. We try to address things. We work closely with the team and collaborate with the people that are around us. And, you know, one of the real serious concerns, and I really like what I'm hearing, but if we look at the purpose of museums, they basically ought to tell a story. They collect, they preserve, we interpret, we display. And there should be a timeline in the Jackson House as a museum that will tell the African-American story and those that were involved in that house. But in the process of doing it, we want to make sure that there's nowhere else in Tampa that have a very thorough and detailed story of the African American life in the city. And so when we look at that historical and pullback, we looked at the involvement of military men who came in and got off the train, didn't know where to go, and couldn't stay in a hotel. They stayed in the Jackson House. We looked at some Native Americans that we found out that actually stayed in. And we had a young man that was actually a Native American himself, and he was working with some individuals with the Seminole tribe. So we want to make sure that we can gather, garnish, and pull in anyone that, even if you're not on the board, but you want to make a contribution to what we're doing with the board, come on in, give us a call, go on the website. Somebody say, you take every opportunity. So I would indicate the website is the jacksonhousefoundation.org, or you can send us an email at contact@jacksonhousefoundation.com. You can call at 813-803-2407, and those messages will come to us. But we are open. We want the community to be involved, and we understand that if we're going to educate and if we're going to tell the story of the city of Tampa, and we're going to do it right, that we're going to need everybody to the table and everybody putting a significant piece in. And we certainly appreciate this opportunity from the History Center. We look forward to working with you. We know that Fred has been there quite a bit and working with Willie. And I've worked with Fred in the community as well. But we want to be sure that when we tell this story, we do it in a timeline fashion that is not just, as you indicated, the people in the Jackson House. Everybody always say, because of Tisket or Tasket, I lost my yellow basket, was written in that house. I always like to hear Miss Johnny say there were 3 pianos and there were sets going on all the time in the house where everybody was practicing. But I always listen and love to hear Willie tell the story of Nat King Cole and his parents and how they traveled with him internationally when he went to do his tours. And because Willie's father also was a barber and did the processes, whatever you call those hairstyles now, Willie's father and his mother would go, and everybody asked, what was those fans going all up the stairs? Those fans actually was where she had traveled, and she had accumulated those fans. So, there are different things out there. I appreciate this opportunity. Our board meet, reach us, call us, and get us involved. We want to get you involved with us, and we want you to get involved both ways. So it's a two-way street, and we want to work with our community. And we're grateful for the Vinnick Foundation. We're grateful for the mayors that have assisted us, the county commissioners, the school board individuals who've come to work with us, and everyone else in this community, because this is Tampa's history. It may be Black history, but it's Tampa's history. Thank each of you.
Thank you. Absolutely. You're obviously 100% right about that. It's all of our history. Tampa's history, the African American component of is critically important. And your words of thanks to the Vinnick Family Foundation and the Lighton Foundation brings us very appropriately to Christina Barker. And just if you don't mind, Christina, just tell us why the Vinnick family was interested in contributing money to the preservation of the historic Jackson House.
Yeah, I think that there's a pretty well-known story about Jeff and Penny's investment in Tampa and the new development that they have spearheaded downtown. But I think that from our perspective, building Tampa's future, you also have a responsibility to preserve Tampa's past and make sure that, anything new that is coming for people to see and feel that they're able to learn about the history of Tampa, and specifically African American history. And so, more than a year ago, when we got involved with this project and we first met with Dr. Collins and the board, and met Miss Saunders, I think that we knew that it was important, but over the past year, it's really felt like how important it is really not lost on anybody. Over 2020, when we saw the Black Lives Matter protests and we saw the the demand for, accountability. We think that now more than ever that it's just incredibly important to invest in our history, specifically the history of the Jackson House. And we're just really thrilled to be really part of this team and be able to help. When I was able to talk with Miss Johnny Saunders at the house and hear her stories, that's when it really dawned on me just how critical this project was and how deep the emotions run for it. Hearing about her family and the room she was born in, the room she lived in, it's just really, really inspiring. And I think that once it's done, it'll have the ability to inspire generations to come. So we're really excited about it.
Great, thank you so much. And we see the future, right there, and that's an important part of this as well. So we have a lot of questions from you all, and we really appreciate that. And continue, please, to write them. But I will go through a few of them. There are some questions that are directed specifically at some of our presenters, and so I think I will go to that one first. And so I just saw a good one. Actually, they're all good ones. I shouldn't say that. But there was one specifically for Dr. Collins. In doing research, this is from Ariana. In doing research, I see that the Jackson House has collaborated with Domino's with Slice the Price cards to help fundraise for the restoration. How did this partnership come to be?
Very interesting. We actually have our young student, the high school student. We have a high school and a college student on the board. The high school student came on the board and she indicated, well, I need to see where I want to work. And she created for us something that we really was working on, but had not finalized or put it in a concrete fashion. She wanted to create certain committees. The fundraising committee was one of the ones, and they had been working on a number of projects, and that was one of them, but she wanted to see them. And so Penda, who is our vice chair, is our fundraising, and she saw this project. We have all board members looking at different fundraising type projects. They're working on one now. I won't say what that is as well, but we're working on fundraising so that we would be able to fundraise, put money in the Jackson House and do further fundraising and assist, and then put ourselves in a position to write grants so that we will have money in perpetuity. And that's how that one came. I think it's going to run one full year. It's a $10 purchase. You purchase it, and every time you buy one piece, you get another one. So if you buy 2, you get 4. If you buy 10, you get 20. We actually use that program. We almost carried it to fruition during election time with the college students. They wanted to buy pizza. They didn't have enough money. That was what they was going to give out, pizza and water and things like that on election day. So we say, look, here, I told them, take my card. You guys don't have one. Take my card and we'll donate half of the money that you need to spend. So if you're paying $10 or $12 for a pizza, we're going to pay the other half for you, and then you're going to get another one free. So that's how that came about. It came from Penda, our vice chair, and our fundraising chairperson, a semi-marketing person. And she's invested in a number of other projects too. We've had some great ones, and as they were going along, we actually was working with something with Nat King Cole daughter and things of that nature. So yes, that's how that came about.
That's fantastic.
And if anybody else have any great ideas, give us a call. We'll do them.
Absolutely. Going to crowdsource some great ideas out there. So again, a lot of questions coming in. We really appreciate that. So I'm going to throw one to Fred, and kind of put you on the spot here, Fred. So who were some of the kind of the thought leaders and kind of the big thinkers here in Tampa among the African American community in the 20th century? So kind of your Marcus Garveys, your Dr. Kings, Dr. DuBose, those type of people. Who were some of those important leaders here in Tampa in the 20th century, African American leaders in the 20th century?
Well, the list is long, but let me start with a woman who was just an incredible person. When you look at the things that she was able to accomplish, it's unbelievable. And I'm talking about Blanche Armwood, who graduated from high school, completed all the requirements for a high school diploma at the age of 12, graduated from Spelman College in Atlanta with an undergrad degree at the age of 16, became a teacher, came back to Tampa, eventually became a position that was created for her by the school district because the Black population was exploding. And because of segregation, of course, all of the Black students went to segregated Black schools. The white students went to white schools. She was the first supervisor of Negro education for Hillsborough County, for the school district in 1925. Then she went on to become the founding executive secretary of the Tampa Urban League. Urban League all over the country played a major role. It's still important, but it really was important in the 1920s and 1930s for giving Black people an opportunity to get training, to get employment, to qualify for all types of opportunities that the Urban League lobbied for them. One of those things was opening schools. And so that was one of the things that separated her from everybody else. Then she went to Howard University Law School and got a law degree and came back and practiced law here in Hillsborough County. And then eventually she died at the age of 49, still a very young woman. So we have Blanche Armwood High School in Seffner, named for her. Perry Harvey, head of the Longshoremen Association, 1935 until his death in the 1970s. So many other people. I mean, I'll just mention one other person who only lived here for a couple of years, but was so important, Rodney, and you recall that he has a bronze bust on the Riverwalk, Benjamin Mays, who followed Blanche Armwood as secretary of the Tampa Urban League, was only here for 2 years, but did so much to give Black people a reason to stand up straight and hold their head up and press forward, despite the segregation and the racism and the discrimination that was at every turn. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on. Dr. Collins knows a lot of these folk also, but those are just a few who stand out in my mind.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah, exactly. There's a very long list. And again, between the interpretation here at the History Center that we're going to embark on to talk about a lot of those folks and interpretation that could happen at the Jackson House, we're going to really cover a lot of those stories. Real quick, shout out to Dr. Collins from Dr. Fox. Says you're still amazing. Just want to make sure that you saw that from Liana. There have been a few questions about the timeline for the preservation of the home itself. And if anybody has ever tried to do any work on an older house, you'll know that the timeline is always a bit longer than you want it to be. This house in particular has, as you can see from looking at it, some structural problems that need to be worked through. And historic preservation is never a fast process, but for this project, it's a very important process, obviously. And so it will take some time. There is not even really an established finish line or finish timeline because of the work of the structural engineers and architects who need to evaluate the home and really establish the best steps moving forward to completely preserve that home. And so, but the home is going to stay right where it is, and it's going to be preserved, and it's a really exciting project. And so again, it's one of those things that will take a lot of time up front, but once work begins, you all will be able to see quite a bit of progress. So we can appreciate that support, appreciate those questions. A real quick question for Fred. Again, a fan out there for your history tours. Any plans to do any more history tours in the near future?
Well, I did the Tampa Bay history tours for 13 years. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, which of course pretty much put a halt to those bus tours. Coincidentally, that was the same time that I planned to close the business, enter grad school at USF. And so I don't have a license anymore to do tours, but who knows what tomorrow might bring.
Exactly. You never know. And again, with Fred joining the History Center staff, we already do a lot of walking tours, and so maybe we can work. We can add more to Fred's plate. So there again, there's so many great questions that you all are sending in. So there was one I wanted to actually, I don't want to address them all, but I apologize for my scrolling here and not addressing you guys. Oh, it's gone. So sorry about that. So again, go to one of these questions. Someone wants to become involved in the Jackson House Board. Again, Dr. Collins, if you could just give your website and your the phone number to anybody interested in joining the board. And then after you do that, there is a very specific question about the Tampa NAACP or the Hillsborough County NAACP. Are they working directly with the Jackson House Foundation board?
Okay. Very good question. And I'll give you the PO box is too long. So I'll give you the website. People don't like to write anymore anyway. But our phone number is 813-803-2407. You can go on the website at the jacksonhousefoundation.org. Our webmaster does an excellent job of trying to kind of keep it current and keep it up, even though sometimes he changed it and I go, I don't like that. I like the old one. But it's not just for me. And you can contact us by sending an email at contact@jacksonhousefoundation. And I said .com earlier, I think it's .org. But the reality of it, if you go on the website, there's a little block and it asks you to just send your name in and we send you information. And that's how you can actually join. We have what we call an advisory committee as well as a board. And we're going to start back. We just talked about it on last month's meeting. We're going to start back our quarterly advisory meetings. So individuals can join us through those mechanisms, call us, email us, go on the website as well. And if you know any of the board members, you can give them a call and they'll share that information with you as well. But yes, and there is an application that you can download for the board that's on the website. I'm sure Alex got that on there as well. The NAACP involvement with the Jackson House was during my term as president. It was a vote made that I keep that to make sure that we keep it going and that I actually chair that and control that piece. And I was glad they did because when I left the NAACP, I stayed around for a couple of years, but I'm no longer as active with the NAACP and we moved it out. So no, they are not as involved and active as they was during my tenure as a president. To be honest with you, a couple of the young people that we have, they came from the youth NAACP, which is a separate entity from the adults, but they are still the NAACP Youth and College Chapter. And the gentleman that was actually running that group and the AXO group, and that's where the interest came because the kids want to actually do a demonstration, a layout, or a display of what they felt the Jackson House should be in the future. And I think that's where they got their interest of when they found out about the Jackson House. So no, they are not involved. If I'm assuming if I had gone to them and asked them, I'm sure we would probably be able to maneuver there. But there are many members of the NAACP, life members, subscribing life and regular members that support us, that donate to us or assist us with activities and events that we're doing.
Great, thank you so much. And again, there's been a lot of folks chiming in here. Obviously fundraising, there will be perpetual fundraising for the Jackson House project. And so as Dr. Collins mentioned, when the house was privately owned by Willie and earlier by his mom, you could give them money, but of course it wasn't tax deductible. But now that the Jackson House Foundation owns the building, you can donate to the Jackson House Foundation. Again, I'm sure Dr. Collins will talk about that a little bit. It's a 501c3. So if you want to sponsor particular parts of the house, I think that would be a kind of a neat idea from a fundraising standpoint. So again, Dr. Collins, if you'd like to mention that, but we don't necessarily have to. But of course, I'm sure you would love to have any donations that could help with the restoration efforts.
Yeah, most definitely. We will welcome anyone who would like to make a donation to the Jackson House Foundation. We working collaboratively with the History Center. We think that extremely large donations should be managed extremely well. And we do have a well put together board. We got a CPA that's our treasurer and assistant treasurer, but we prefer the money going in different directions, but even the board is receiving money. So all you need to do is get in touch with us. We would be more than willing to accept that. And we're also going after grants. There are some grants that we have a collaborative group that Ms. Barker, Christina is on with us, and we are going to go at those level of grants from that angle. We ask for funding from the state legislators. We ask for funding from the congressional legislators. We ask for funding for governmental entities and private organizations. The Jackson House is going to cost, as you indicated, a timeline at length. We still working with that collaboratively with our team, and I call the leader of that team is Christine Barker. But we are working on that, and we will be more than willing to receive any funding or donation. And we have people that go on our website and they actually make we get it all the time. They go to our PayPal and they just send us donations at the PayPal. And even our Jackson House t-shirts and our Jackson House masks. Gonna be wearing masks for a while. Be nice to have that pretty Jackson House mask. I should have bought one up so I could have showed it to you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Fundraising takes all kinds of forms.
Yes.
So we have a question for Brad. And is there anything you would like for the city of Tampa to know, that I assume the citizens of Tampa to know, about the Jackson House that isn't already out there? Any little nuggets of history about the house that people don't already know?
That people don't already know. I mean, there's a lot I think that people don't already know. I think architecturally, maybe what a lot of people don't know, I know some insiders know this, but the house, that's not its original form. Basically it's just a one-story dwelling. And then Fred had alluded to this. Once the Jackson family, Moses and Sarah, realized the commercial potential of the house, they expanded almost immediately, like within the first few years. So what you're seeing is a structure that, as the family changes, and I think you could argue as they become more entrepreneurial, the house itself changes. And so I think that's one interesting thing. When you're looking at it, you're really looking at something that has changed over time as the family and the neighborhood has changed. So maybe that's an interesting tidbit people might not know. They think the house always looked like that, but it changed as times literally changed.
Exactly. That's a great point, Brad. So 2 questions for Fred. One will be really, I think, pretty easy for you to answer, and then another one more contemplative. When was the last time that there were boarders at the Jackson House? And then kind of the more contemplative question, how will the restoration of the house impact the Black community of this generation?
As far as I know, the last boarders were in the 1980s. The early 1980s. And I think that's the time period when Ms. Robinson, as I said, who lived there her entire life, took in her last boarder. And after that, it was just the family home. But of course, people visited. But so you've got from, I don't know, maybe 1904, 1905, somewhere around there, when maybe they took in their first boarders up until the 1980s. What I think this will mean to the community is that, we have never had a Black History Museum in Tampa. There's never been one. There was an African American Museum of Art that Dr. Ike Tribble put together several years ago. I know Dr. Collins will remember that, over on Florida Avenue. There have been some small private attempts to have history here and there. And, we've never had an African American museum totally dedicated to Black history. And so that's what it will mean. You travel around this country and you find every major city has at least one African American museum, every one that I've gone to. Even smaller cities, smaller places.
Yeah.
And with the incredible history that we have here, Central Avenue alone deserves a museum. But with all of the different residential areas from Port Tampa to Dobyville to Sulphur Springs to West Tampa to Belmont Heights, Jackson Heights, Ybor City, all these little enclaves where Black people live, even though for many years, as I said, this was a segregated city, but there were pockets of Black people who made it work. We took a little and made a lot out of it, and we made it work. And so those are the stories that this museum can tell. And that's why it's so important, not only for us, but for our children and for our children's children.
Absolutely, Fred. You are 100% right. Thank you so much. A couple questions that I will answer really quickly. The next steps for preservation. We talked about preservation a little bit. So it's a historic structure, and it's also designated as such by the city of Tampa, and it's on the National Register as well. So there are steps that need to be taken kind of more diligently, which can slow the process. But the major thing that needs to be done first is a structural review, and just to make sure that the structure of the house can handle the restoration. And once that process is over, then the actual restoration will begin. So again, as I mentioned, you will see kind of what appears to be not a lot of progress, but there's progress actually happening kind of behind the scenes, or really under the scenes, as it were, with the foundation and other parts of the home. But also, once that part is done and the actual restoration process begins, you will begin to see a lot of progress very quickly. Another question about 3D imaging. Our partners at USF, Digital Humanities Department within the library, did a lot of 3D imaging of the home, both inside and out. They actually returned and were able to do 3D imaging of the second floor, and I believe even the attic structure and the foundation. And so the results of that will be available first on the Digital Humanities website at USF, and eventually, of course, at our website, and even potentially in part of the interpretation of the home itself. We had somebody who did a little bit of research on their own and found 1940 edition of the Green Book to talk about some of the things that were in there for Tampa. The Central Hotel, Dallas Hotel. The Dallas Hotel was actually just a few doors down from the Jackson House. The Deluxe Hotel on Constant Street, as well as 2 restaurants in the Green Book, the Dixie Restaurant and Bruce's, and then the Little Savoy on Central as the saloon that was listed in the Green Book. One thing that is a much broader topic to talk about, and something actually that History Center's Manny Leto has done a lot of research on, is urban renewal and the effects of urban renewal. And so we had somebody who asked a question, and I'll direct this to Brad, but obviously anybody else can certainly join in with the answer. But what can we do as historians and as kind of the museum, as interpreters of history and people who share the history of past events? What can we do to help tell the history of urban renewal, but really use that history to inform the potential decisions that are being made today that relate to very large scale projects, oftentimes road projects, but other large scale projects that can have devastating effects potentially on neighborhoods. So again, start with Brad. What can we learn about urban renewal, and what can those lessons that we learn, how can they help us inform the decisions we make now and in the future?
Yeah, well, I think the most proactive thing we can do to learn about urban renewal is record people's stories and record physical things. That's what we do at the History Center. We collect things so we can tell history. And once those things disappear, they're gone, right? Once they get thrown to a landfill. So the first thing we can do is collect. We can look at members of our community and say, your stories and your stuff is important, right? We want to keep it for posterity. And so I think that's one of the most important things we should do. In terms of the lessons of urban renewal, which of course is a disaster, right? I mean, it destroys the fabric of a community. And I hope we look back and we say, you can't just decide, for the good of a particular portion of society that you can run an interstate through a neighborhood. Because when you do that, you can't bring it back, right? I mean, and that's why the Jackson House is so important. So many of those structures have been demolished, they're gone, and you're wiping away the history. And we've talked about this, and I want to reiterate this point. Yes, this is a history of African Americans, businesses, of a family in Tampa, but it's all of our histories. And once you start knocking buildings down, that's it, they're gone. So I think one of the big takeaways from urban renewal is, you know, policymakers need to be very careful when they plan big projects that are going to tear through communities. And I just hope that's something that we keep in mind. And I'll let everybody else answer, Rodney, if anybody wants to jump in.
Rodney, if I can add very quickly, the new concern now is gentrification. It's actually not new, but it's risen its head on almost every other corner now where you look and you see construction cranes. And I often wonder, what was there before? And what can we do to make sure that we hold on to as much of the fabric of this city as we can? And I understand progress, and I understand how investors have the right to run their businesses and build things that will benefit the bottom line. I get it, I understand that. But as historians and as historic preservationists, it always concerns us when we see that there could have been more of an effort. I think this is what Brad is saying, to save more than perhaps we have in the past. So let's learn from those lessons. And the other key thing is, we did not have an African American on the Tampa City Council until 1983. By then, so many decisions had been made. You know, the interstate system came through in the 1960s. So that kind of tells you that when there's not a voice, when there are not people in power and positions of authority to represent the interests of the community that maybe does not have that voice otherwise, then these things tend to happen.
You're absolutely right. Again, that's a great point to make, Fred, is the not only disenfranchisement that existed with the African American community, but the lack of representation, even when it became at least a little easier to exercise the right to vote. You're absolutely right about that. We are running out of time rapidly. I know there's lots of questions. So actually, if you have any questions that haven't been answered, please feel free to type them in Facebook, and we as a staff will answer those questions, and everybody can see the questions that you all ask, which is kind of neat. But there have been some talk about the possibility or the suggestion of moving the Jackson House to some other location because there is potential for development around it, and really it's important. And as we just discussed, context is really important. And so the context of the home is on Zack Street, is adjacent to Union Station, and its history as a place for people coming in from Union Station on the train to have a place readily available to stay. And so so the idea that that development might encircle the house is certainly a possibility. It would be nice if there was a bit of a buffer that could be acquired around the home, and so hopefully that can happen at some point. There's no signage indicating that the house is a National Register structure. That will certainly be the case once that happens. Once it happens, but once the home is restored. Even it could be a historic marker, which would be nice addition to the property as well. There was a quick question about the Jackson family. How long have they been in Tampa? If anybody knows the answer to that, quickly, you guys can answer that, Brad or Fred or Carolyn. When did the Jacksons first come to Tampa?
There's some information that around 1900, 1901, but the family may have been here even longer than that. That was the acquisition of the property of the single family, single story home. So that made the historical designations. And I just wanted to mention that it was there's a local one for construction in 1899, and that was even before we say the house was built. There was a local historic one in 2004, and then it went on a National Registry of Historical Places in 2006, and we have to give the credit for all of that to Mrs. Willie's mother, because she was the one who really pursued each one of those and wanted to make sure that they were on. And let me just close out with what Fred said about gentrification with urban renewal. There's a necessity that pulls the two of them together. And as we pull them together and realize how it has devastated communities across the country, that's the one thing that we want to make sure. And even when people say it moved the house, we even looked at moving the house and putting the house over in the Encore area and other areas. The house we anticipate will stay where it is and will maintain the history of Tampa and the African-American community via the Jackson House at that spot. Rodney, are you there, Rodney? I know he's muted.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Back. We had a little technical difficulty here.
It's okay. I was
oh,
only
no, we're
talking
good.
more, waiting to see you come back.
Yeah, no, we're fine. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's again another really good point. And again, more research is always available to be done, or needs to be done by to further flesh out the story of the Jackson family. And there will, again, one of the ideas for interpretation of the home, of course, is to include history of the Jackson family, because that's an important aspect of the home itself. So it's one of those things you go kind of the macro and you go micro with your history. One last question. Again, I apologize if any questions have not been answered. I see more and more coming in, which is very kind of you all. But we'll end with something we haven't really talked about. Fred, you're absolutely right that there is no African American History Museum devoted to Tampa history. But through the efforts of many people, including yourself, there is an interpretive area at the Saunders Library. And so somebody asked about the collections that are housed at the Saunders Library, and if how will there be any resources that are being gathered complement that, and really talk a little bit about the display at the Saunders Library and the importance of the Saunders Library to the African American community.
Well, thank you for that question, and I think it's appropriate to maybe end the program. I think we're close to the end on that issue. To sum it up in just a couple of initials, the NAACP. That's why the Saunders Library exists. Robert W. Saunders was an NAACP man at a time when it was dangerous to go around, especially in these small areas in Florida, which he did in the 1950s as the Florida Field Secretary for the NAACP, trying to get people to join the organization. That was dangerous work. And then the Johns Committee tried to get their membership list. Can you imagine what would have happened to those members of the NAACP had their names been made public to their employers and the people who held their mortgages and so forth? So we had the inspiration, and Sarah Jackson Robinson was a founding member of the Robert W. Saunders Library Friends. The Ada T. Payne Friends of the Urban Library. She and Willie came to the very first meeting, and they were there the entire time that they were alive. So it tells the story of the presidents of the NAACP. It tells the story of the Jackson House and other important venues in the city of Tampa where African Americans lived, worked, went to school, so forth and so on. And it's part of the walking tour, Rodney, as you know, for the Tampa Bay History Center. I started the tour. Ursula Odom now does the Historic Central Avenue walking tour, and it starts at the Robert W. Saunders Library. So you go inside the library, you push a button, you hear Ray Charles singing, and you learn a little about the time he spent in Tampa. And you push another button, and you'll hear someone else talking about what they did when they were in Tampa. And so you get a sense of history there. It's not really a museum, but it's the closest thing to it that we have for the African-American story. But what a compliment the Jackson House is going to be to the Saunders Library and to the Tampa Bay History Center and to other things that are popping up all over town. There's some other projects that are going to happen, but the Jackson House is so special. I'll end with this. I did one of my last walking tours with students at Booker T. Washington Elementary School. The principal led us with about 25 students, and we walked from Booker T. Washington. They wanted to go to the Jackson House. That's the one place they wanted to go. We walked down there, we took pictures. Of course, we couldn't go inside. So there's a lot of interest in young people. That's what I love, Dr. Collins. So many young people want to learn more about the Jackson House. I mean, it's kind of a thing now. So we're on the right track.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way to end, Fred. We are on the right track. Thank you all to the panelists, to Fred and to Brad, to Carolyn and to Christina. And thank you all for your questions. This is, I think, the best one of these that I've been involved in, certainly with the involvement of our live viewers. And for those of you who missed this, you'll be able to see it. You're going to be saying this, but this will be available on our website, on our Facebook page, and on our YouTube channel. So, and this, as well as other these virtual programs that we're doing. So we thank you all so much for tuning in out for other programs by Tampa Bay History Center. Thank you all so much.
Good night.
Good night. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And Christina,